came up with the idea for the project on water not by aiming to do a project and not by aiming to photograph water. I was looking for something that was more difficult, more challenging for me as a person, but also more relevant to people. So what I mean by that is, when I left New York City, I was working in a way that had very clear parameters as a photojournalist, where there was a responsibility to the viewer, there was a responsibility to the factual nature of an event, telling people about what is happening in their world so that they can be informed. There was a box with very clear outlines, and I wanted to free myself from that box. I wanted to see just what type of person I could become if I removed all these labels from myself. And this is where it led me to look at different topics that would ultimately distract me in many ways. So what I mean is that I looked at everything from resource extraction to large-scale migration to overpopulation, looking at themes that united us because they crossed our borders, looking at themes that penetrated our narratives and kind of held our narratives up to ourselves and said, this is how we imagine ourselves to be. And as I went further and further down this road, I realized that there was an opportunity to talk about all of these things if I looked at one thing. And so that one thing kind of was always there. It was always kind of like, kind of buzzing in the back of my research. It was kind of staring me right in the face, actually. It was in every topic I was looking at, and it was underpinning every aspect of human interaction. And that topic was water. So in a way, the creative process to find something to speak about common humanity, that process then demanded that it would be water. The goal of the project has always been for me to see it created. It might have a use in society. Its purpose might have a relevancy politically or socially to bring awareness, but that was never my goal, to bring awareness. I view my role and my job as a photographer to explore the deepest meanings of what the world is around me for myself. And from there, the things that I'm able to bring back, I feel like they can then have other uses beyond my control. I feel like by focusing on this aspect, by focusing on this very simple idea of self-understanding through the understanding of the other, this gives me the opportunity to keep my focus very macro, while the scale of my work might be very large. The way in which I approach the project is by dividing it into conceptual chapters. That chapter structure means that the chapter might encapsulate a country. So I might be photographing the aspects of water and interaction with human beings in one country. Or that might mean I see the same subject stretching across a few countries. So in order to prepare myself to address these and to build these chapters one after the other and interlink them, what I do is I look at everything but photography. That's kind of my method, is to research the place that I'm going to, that I'm preparing for, so that I'm able to understand the context of what I'm doing. Then there comes a point where I must cast all of that out. I have to say, I've learned as much as I can in terms of preparation, and then I have to admit that I won't ever know. And that admission is what allows me to start branching off in more interesting areas. That's when you start listening to people. That's when you start really learning. That's when you see opportunities when you would never see opportunities before. And so that's kind of my process, is intense preparation followed by a willingness to completely abandon control. Making photographs is not really that challenging to me. It's a very therapeutic process, a very meditative process, and enjoyable. It's a remarkable thing to be able to do. It's a privilege and a responsibility at the same time. And it's also something that, while it's serious, it's also not that serious. So in the process of making photographs, I quite enjoy it. I quite enjoy the surprise of it. But in the backdrop, the preparation to make the work, to come back and look at the work, to get support for the work, to bring it to people and make them understand just what it might be, the possibility of the work, to use imagination within both the industry of photography as well as how to bring it to viewers, I find that to be the most challenging aspect of photography, is translating my vision and my understanding and my desires to people that might not share those. And so that's always been a challenge, is communication and trying to bridge those two aspects of the work, what it means to me and the people that are in place, the gatekeepers of our industry that are responsible with bringing photography to the forefront. I have a very short amount of patience for myself. And I mean that, meaning that when I'm doing my work, even before I'm going to a place or I'm in the moment or I'm looking into a topic or an idea or about to go down a path that might be ultimately something interesting, I'm possibly too self-critical of myself, meaning that I think of all the variations of what I'm seeing, and I'm constantly thinking, that's not challenging yourself enough. And so before I ever raise my camera, actually the way I photograph, I keep it on me, but I almost never look through it when I'm trying to photograph. And when I do photograph, I don't physically look through the camera anymore. Meaning that if someone puts their eye to the viewfinder, I don't. I keep my eye about this far away because I almost have a rejection of having this block my development of an idea. And that's just what feels okay for me. And then what that leads to when I'm composing or reacting to something is a willingness to not settle. And that's kind of really what comes around to your question, which is the lack of like a reliable visual signature to kind of utilize so that you're able to see yourself as a photographer being recognized. That's of no interest to me. I want to try things, and I want them to not work as well, and I want to see what things look like. When Gary Winograd said this once, they asked him why he photographed, and he said, I want to see what things look like when they're photographed, and I absolutely love this. It's one of the most New Yorker answers to the question you could possibly imagine. Are you familiar with the photograph of the man having the water splashed on his face? That's a church service on the side of a highway in South Africa. That means more to me than the actual church services I went to inside churches. Because for me, the idea of that man, he was going there to use the service on the side of a highway to help him get over his addiction of alcohol and cigarettes. It's this really earnest desire, this passion to redeem oneself that is so universal that he's willing to kneel in front of strangers because he doesn't know that church. He never met them. He went there because this was accessible to him. The other churches weren't accessible to him. Maybe they were too serious, and maybe they said something to his idea of redemption that it was not possible to do it that way. But maybe this church on the side of a highway was. That's so human to me, to live with the choice to live with the shame of one's choices rather than seek redemption. And so to hear him and to see him kneel there, all of a sudden that becomes more important to me than any of the other variations where people are using spirituality and water, because that's the reaction that I need in order to apply that idea that I mentioned to you before. And so I then took something that seemed very unserious, the desire to cure oneself from cigarettes and from tobacco and alcohol, using spirituality. And I made it into something serious now, because it needed to be, because that was something beautiful to me. So keeping myself in a box is really my greatest fear. And even when I create a box for myself, meaning that I want to photograph a chapter of the work without using any people in the frame, that motif, that little exercise, that challenge, that personal challenge, I ended up breaking it. Not because I even wanted to, because it's not in my nature to stay within a box. But I need those challenges just as much as anyone else. And I would say that the limit of those stylistic or aesthetic boxes that you were describing before about like a recognizable signature, those, if one person is not careful, and if an individual is not careful, they will become their greatest barrier to creative progression, because they're creating their own wall. And that wall is going to be the hardest one to tear down if you don't acknowledge it. So I try to constantly check myself, create new ways to overcome my limitations and constantly grow. So looking through the limitless feeling of the sequence, what I was trying to relate that sensation to was a sensation that I have frequently when I look at the night sky. When you see a big sky full of stars, when you're away from the city, when you're alone and you're kind of isolated, and you really get to understand your own scale. And this can be scary, but for me, it always is inspirational, because what it does is tells me that I'm a part of something large, and then I just don't need to be the center. I don't need to be the most important idea, even in my own existence. And I think that transition, that move from being okay with not being the center of something, but being a part of something, is fundamentally a part of the work I'm doing. And so this sensation, this idea, was in many ways a part of how I chose to sequence, was to feel limitless, to feel like the viewer could be in any of these places. And the moment they looked at the next photograph, they would almost unpredictably be transported across the planet. And hopefully each time they felt that, they felt more and more amazement about the world that we're living in. And if I can communicate that sensation, one that I feel quite deeply and one I believe in, and that I make this work from, then hopefully the viewer can walk away and feel like they can make a difference, that they do matter, even if it's an overwhelming challenge. So that's how I chose to photograph.